Tokyo's sky is ablaze as deep purple lightning bolts keep ripping through the atmosphere. A deafening, skull-splitting roar is thundering through the air. An invisible monster is moving at 249 miles per hour. The skyscrapers in Shinjuku are shaking violently, like cursed clock pendulums. Thunder cracks, piercing the ears. Tens of thousands of reinforced glass panes from the 50th floor all explode at once from the pressure difference, turning into a rain of razor-sharp blades plunging straight onto the flooded streets. Cars are lifted off the ground by the wind, spinning helplessly before slamming into neon billboards that are shorting out and popping with explosions. People aren't running anymore. They can only scream in despair, clinging to anything that's bolted down. But then even lampposts and bus stop shelters are ripped out by the roots and swept away. Humanity's greatest enemy has truly returned. The monster super typhoon. Tip, once a record-low 870 HPA has been reborn, more brutal than ever, because the ocean is boiling from climate change. With a diameter of 1,553 miles, it blankets the entire sky, and its pressure has plunged to a level that could blow living lungs apart. This is no longer a natural disaster. This is a death sentence for civilization. Welcome to Mother Nature's worst-case scenario. The rebirth of Super Typhoon Tip, 72 hours before J-hour. Off the coast of Micronesia, in the Western Pacific. The sea is no longer the familiar deep blue. The vast ocean surface has now turned into a thick, lead gray. The measured sea surface temperature has crossed the critical threshold, reaching 89.6 degrees Fahrenheit. A colossal nuclear fuel reservoir is waiting for a spark. The air is so heavy it's hard to breathe. The saturated humidity makes human skin clingy, like stepping out of a stifling steam room. Under the water, an unprecedented panic migration is unfolding. Along the Guam coastline, hundreds of whales and dolphins, the ocean's most sensitive creatures, charge crazily straight onto the sand. They beach themselves, thrashing in despair because of the sudden pressure change in the deep seafloor. In the sky, flocks of seagulls spiral chaotically, disoriented, smashing into cliffs in suicide dives at the Joint Typhoon Warning Center in Hawaii and Japan's meteorological agency. The tension is like a string about to snap. Meteorologists stare at the radar screens, cold sweat beads on their foreheads. The numbers are going wild, defying every law of physics they were ever taught. The pressure is dropping 900, 800, 9.881 screams erupt in the control room. But the number doesn't stop there. It keeps free-falling, like an elevator with its cable-cut 870 HPA. The monster Tip's 1,979 record has been wiped out. 860 HPA, 855 HPA. And finally, the reading stops at something unimaginable, 850 HPA. This is an atmospheric black hole. At this pressure, air is sucked into the storm's core with terrifying compression, creating a gigantic vacuum zone in the middle of the ocean. If someone were standing right in the eye of the storm right now, the pressure would be so low the blood vessels in their eyes could rupture on their own, and their lungs would collapse from lack of oxygen. On the satellite screen, the destroyer's true form comes into focus terrifyingly clear. It isn't a messy swirl of clouds. It's a perfect spiral structure, brutal and eerily beautiful. The storm's diameter spreads out to 1,553 miles, big enough to swallow half of the continental United States, or blanket all of Southeast Asia. But the most horrifying thing is the devil's eye, the storm's eye, a perfectly round, pitch-black void at the very center of the blinding white cloud mass, nearly 62 miles wide. Inside that black hole, the sky is clear and calm, strangely peaceful. But surrounding it is a thick wall of clouds rising up to 11 miles high, packed with purple lightning and annihilating winds that can snap any man-made material. 12 hours before hour, the storm begins sweeping over Japan's southern outlying islands Okinawa first. The first residents feel death's breath. No instruments needed. The human body reacts on its own. Children start screaming, clutching their heads. The elderly collapse onto the floor. The pressure difference is so extreme, their eardrums ache like needles are stabbing them. Their chests are squeezed tight, as if an invisible boulder is crushing their hearts. People with a history of cardiovascular disease start gasping for air. Nosebleeds pour non-stop, impossible to stop. Japan's disaster warning system triggers its highest level. Sirens and flashing alarms howl across all 47 prefectures, seeping into every alleyway, every building. This is not a drill. Immediate evacuation is required. Get underground shelter immediately. A cold, mechanical voice blares from millions of phones, TVs, and public address speakers, repeating over and over like a chant before an execution. But where can you run? With hurricane-force winds sweeping the entire length of the country, not an inch of Honshu is safe. Shinkansen stations are jam-packed. Panic begins spreading like a virus. People shove and trample each other to claim a spot inside the subway tunnels. Supermarkets are wiped clean in 10 minutes. Empty shelves lie in ruins, like they've just been looted. Tokyo sky is no longer a dull gray. The entire southern sky flares up in a ghostly purple, a sign of extreme, fully saturated atmospheric moisture refracting the city's lights. Dragon-scale clouds sink so low, people feel like they could reach out and touch them. They swell and sag, heavy like demonic breasts filled with venom. The wind begins to shriek. At first, chilling howls slip through window cracks in high-rise apartments. Roadside trees begin to lean and sway. Branches whip against each other, making sharp, cracking snaps. Tin advertising signs start trembling violently, tearing free from their bolts and smashing into walls, producing clanging, metallic rattles. A colossal purple lightning bolt, as thick as an entire building, strikes straight down onto the Tokyo Skytree. A deafening explosion erupts, tearing through the night. The ground trembles as Sumida Ward's power grid flickers and then goes completely dark. Darkness swallows an entire corner of the city. That was the opening gunshot. From the sea, a towering wall of pitch-black clouds, rising like a moving mountain range, begins crashing onto the mainland. The rain no longer falls straight down. It shoots into the ground like billions of water bullets, relentless and razor-sharp. Raindrops accelerated by the wind lash against windows, sounding like gravel being hurled. Beneath Yokohama port, the sea level begins rising abnormally. Not waves surging, but the entire surface of the ocean lifting upward. Giant cargo ships weighing tens of thousands of tons, anchored in place, are suddenly hoisted up. Mooring lines stretch tight like violin strings, then snap, the metallic rupture booming like cannon fire. The ships drift freely, floating and slamming into shore like deranged beasts. The monster Typhoon has set foot on land, and it is hungrier for destruction than ever before. 9 p.m. The moment of fate has arrived. Night falls over Tokyo, no longer a quiet darkness, but a black burial shroud being shredded by nature's fury. The projected core of Typhoon Tip officially makes landfall on the Boso Peninsula, bringing its strongest gust zone straight into an attack on Japan's capital. If you think you know what storm winds feel like, forget everything you thought you knew. What's happening in Tokyo right now isn't wind. It's a wall of dense, solidified air, moving at a sustained speed of 217 miles per hour, with gusts reaching up to 261 miles per hour. At these speeds, air no longer flows around objects. It becomes a solid mass, slamming into and crushing everything in its path, with impact force equivalent to continuous shockwave explosions. Sound is the first thing that kills the human will. There is no more whistling, no more howling. All space is filled with a deep, thunderous roar that shakes the marrow of the bones, as if the sky itself is collapsing, crushing the earth below. People hiding inside reinforced concrete apartments feel their chests vibrating violently to the rhythm of the wind. Their hands go numb as air pressure fluctuates non-stop. In the heart of Minato Ward Tokyo Tower, the proud red and white symbol of post-war recovery strains to withstand the assault, but before winds of 249 miles per hour, the physical limits of steel are exceeded. Massive steel girders begin emitting piercing groans, like fingernails scraping a chalkboard, amplified thousands of times. A metallic explosion erupts, drowning out even the thunder. In an instant, Tokyo's icon buckles and snaps, collapsing onto the Jojoji Temple below, hundreds of tons of friction-heated steel crashing down in flames, triggering a localized quake as dust and sparks blast outward, only to be instantly swept away into the darkness by the wind. But that was only the overture. The real catastrophe is unfolding in the concrete jungles of Shinjuku and Shibuya. Here, the wind is compressed and accelerated as it funnels through the narrow gaps between high-rise buildings, turning bustling streets into deadly wind tunnels, at speeds surpassing 311 miles per hour. Glass-clad skyscrapers are no longer safe shelters, because the outside pressure drops toward a vacuum far too fast, while the pressure inside the buildings remains unchanged. Tens of thousands of reinforced glass panels from the first to the 50th floors explode all at once. The horror unfolds like a chain of falling dominoes. The glass doesn't just shatter and fall, it's blasted outward by the pressure inside, turning into billions of razor-sharp glass blades fired into the air. All of Tokyo is like, it's trapped inside a storm of glass, bullets, shards streaking at bullet speed, slamming into billboards, slicing through the ground, severing high-voltage power lines, creating bursts of neon green electrical arcs that dance wildly in the whitewashed rain. Cars parked on the streets are lifted up, flipping end over end in midair, then smashing hard into buildings, crumpling and twisting like soaked cardboard boxes. This is a meteorological tsunami. The most terrifying weapon of Super Typhoon tip is the ultra-low atmospheric pressure at its core, working like a gigantic vacuum, sucking the sea surface upward. Then, combined with storm winds, driving that mass of water into shore. In Tokyo Bay, observation stations record a record storm surge of 98 feet, a height that surpasses every strongest seawall the Japanese have ever built. A pitch-black water wall as tall as a 10-story building advances from the sea. There's no white foam. It's a thick mass of water packed with mud, garbage, and shipwreckage. The coastal levee system shatters in under 5 minutes. Seawater pours violently into coastal wards like Koto, Edogawa, and Minato, with the force of thousands of wild beasts. Oil tankers anchored offshore are lifted by the surge and hurled straight inland, bulldozing entire rows of warehouses and coastal neighborhoods. The water floods into the city center. Subway stations, once considered fortress-like shelters for millions of residents, now become death traps at Shinjuku Station. The world's busiest station, chaos turns into a nightmare. Floodwaters smash through the barriers, pouring down escalator shafts like deadly waterfalls, icy pitch-black water carrying the stench of engine oil and sewers, slamming into the underground depths. Hundreds of thousands packed into the station. Concourses begin screaming, the lights cut out. Total darkness takes over. Only the flicker of nearly dead phone screens remains. The roar of water blends with children's cries and frantic screams for loved ones, forming a symphony of despair. People shove each other, trying to rush back up to higher levels. But above them is water, wind, and shattered glass. They're trapped between an underground world filling with water and a surface being ripped apart by the storm. The water rises fast. Subway trains are lifted by the flood, floating and bobbing inside the narrow tunnels, slamming into concrete pillars, crushing anything caught in between. The air inside the tunnels is running out. The wet, cold suffocation creeps into every cell. On the surface, another double disaster begins to erupt. At the Kihin industrial zone along the bay, massive fuel storage tanks can't withstand the pressure of wind and violent waves and are torn apart. Millions of liters of oil spill out, spreading across the floodwater. A lightning bolt strikes down. An entire stretch of Tokyo Bay turns into a sea of fire. A brutal, hell-on-earth scene unfolds. pitch-black water churns below as red flames rage across the surface. And the insane storm winds whip the fire everywhere. Traditional wooden homes are swept away by the water, only to ignite in the middle of the flood. Black smoke billows up, merging into the storm clouds, forming a pitch-black acid rain that pours down on survivors clinging to rooftops. The communications network is completely crippled. Every cell tower is knocked down by the wind. Tokyo, the technological heart of the world, is now totally isolated in darkness. No internet, no cell signal, no light. Only the wind screaming like it wants to take lives. Thunder detonating overhead, and the water's deathly roar rising from below. Humans, creatures who once bragged about conquering nature, are now tiny and helpless, huddled in the dark corners, trembling as they await the final judgment. Tonight, Tokyo doesn't sleep. Tonight, Tokyo dies. Tokyo collapses, but the nightmare doesn't end there. It's only shifting into an even more brutal form. A cascading collapse. If the storm winds are the lethal blade stabbing the capital's heart, then the rainfall that comes with it is the poison spreading outward, corroding the entire body of the land of the rising sun. Super Typhoon Tip, with its colossal size, has sucked an unimaginable amount of moisture from the boiling ocean. And now it dumps that entire burden of water onto the mountains surrounding the Kanto Plain. Within 24 hours, the rainfall total reaches 78.7 inches, equivalent to a year and a half of rain combined. The ground, already waterlogged after pre-storm downpours, now completely loses its ability to hold together. The geological structure of the entire Hakone region, Chichibu and Okutama, begins to groan. Even vegetation rooted more than 33 feet deep can't hold the soil as it liquefies underfoot. And then the geological disaster hits. In the storm's thick darkness, the mountains begin to move. Billions of tons of mud, boulders, and snapped tree trunks form gigantic mudflows. Charging downhill at the speed of a bullet train, the rumbling of the landslide sounds deep and dull, like the grinding of a demon's teeth, swallowing every other sound. Ancient villages that had rested peacefully at the foot of the mountains for centuries are erased in an instant. No time to evacuate. No time to cry for help. The map is being redrawn overnight. Rivers of dark red mud overflow flood-controlled dams, ripping apart the vital expressways that connect Tokyo to the rest of Japan. At the Sasago Tunnel on the Chuo Expressway, a horrifying scene unfolds. A landslide collapses the tunnel entrance, trapping hundreds of cars and trucks inside. Floodwater jets in through cracks, turning the tunnel into a flooded concrete tomb on the eastern shore of Tokyo Bay. The Kyo Industrial Zone, the capital region's energy heart, is living through its final moments. The storm has shredded gas and chemical pipeline systems. A chain of explosions begins. Not from bombs, but from pressure, failure, and electrical shorting. But even more terrifying than fire is the poison. A massive cloud of chlorine and ammonia, leaking from shattered tanks, mixes into the storm winds, forming a yellow death fog. The storm itself becomes the most efficient vehicle for transporting death, blowing this toxic plume across nearby residential areas in Chiba Prefecture. Survivors of the winds now face an invisible death, lungs burning, eyes blinded, throats choking, inside their own homes. In Washington, D.C., the Pentagon convenes an emergency meeting at 3 a.m. The U.S. 7th Fleet, based in Yokosuka, receives orders to deploy rescue operations immediately. The supercarrier USS Ronald Reagan and its escort destroyers try to leave port to reach the disaster zone. But the moment they exit the bay, 115-foot waves as tall as an apartment building rear up and crash over the carrier's flight deck. The massive ship is violently thrown off balance, listing to a dangerous 30-degree angle. The flight deck is swept clean, radar arrays snapping apart. Japan is completely abandoned, isolated and alone in a screaming ocean. News that Tokyo has gone dark And the 7th Fleet's rescue attempt has failed. Spreads at the speed of light. And immediately, a third disaster hits. Global economic collapse. The sudden disappearance of the world's third largest economy triggers a terrifying domino shock. Global tech giants, automakers, major banks, everything crashes. Apple, Tesla, and Amazon stocks go into free fall. Gold and oil prices swing wildly. Trillions of dollars evaporate in just a few hours. The world economy slips into a deep coma. But the numbers on electronic boards mean nothing to the people clinging to rooftops in Tokyo right now. Temperatures plunge suddenly after the storm. Soaked survivors shiver in the bitter wind. They look around and realize a brutal truth. No rescue helicopters, no police sirens, no lights. Skyscrapers are now just lifeless slabs of concrete jutting out of an endless sea. People who once lived in silk and comfort luxury now fight and claw for every floating bottle of water, every soggy chocolate bar. Typhoon tip, with the coldness of an executioner, begins to slow down, circling above the sky over Honshu, as if to make sure not a single life can rise back up easily. The first light of the new day finally slips through the thick cloud layers. But this is not a dawn of hope. This is a black dawn. A cold, merciless sun shines down on a silent battlefield, laying bare the price of human arrogance. The megacity Tokyo is now only a gigantic swamp reeking of death. Skyscrapers that once reached the blue clouds now lie snapped and draped like bleached skeletons. Beneath the pitch-black water, millions of car carcasses bob beside the wreckage of yesterday's comfortable life. No more train horns, no more bustling ad jingles, only the endless rush of waves slamming into shattered concrete walls. A silence so heavy the survivors can hear their own hearts breaking apart. Nature sent a warning named Tip. We called it a once-in-a-century record and then casually forgot it in the intoxication of industrial growth. We kept boiling the ocean, pumping waste into the sky, turning Earth into a pressure cooker. And today, Mother Nature has snapped, and our world collapses. Those stunned eyes stare toward the horizon, where the storm has passed. Understanding their old world has died forever. Typhoon tip today isn't the end. It's the beginning. As the oceans keep heating up, more monsters are waiting in the deep to awaken.